The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed a relentless, indifferent tune, a soundtrack to the controlled chaos of the early morning hours. For Lily Turner, the brief sanctuary of her break was about to end. She had just unwrapped the foil from a slightly squashed turkey sandwich, her first meal in 10 hours, when the alarm blared. It wasn't the usual cacophony of beeps and alerts. It was the sharp, piercing cry of a code blue, cardiac arrest. The sandwich fell from her hands, forgotten. Adrenaline, clean and sharp, surged through her veins, washing away the bone-deep exhaustion. She ran. Her worn sneakers squeaked on the linoleum as she followed the sound, her mind already cycling through protocols, her body moving on pure, ingrained instinct. She burst into the curtained-off bay to a scene of escalating panic. An elderly man lay on the gurney, his face a placid, unnerving shade of gray. Beside him, a younger man, his face a mask of sheer terror, was shaking his father's shoulder. "Dad, wake up!" "I need a pulse check," Lily commanded, her voice cutting through the noise, calm and authoritative. Another nurse fumbled at the man's wrist, her face pale. "Nothing. He's flatlining." Without a second's hesitation, Lily was on the gurney, straddling the elderly man's still form. She ignored the chaos erupting around her, the calls for the crash cart, the frantic pages for the on-call cardiologist. She ignored the terrified son, whose world was collapsing beside her. Her focus narrowed to a single critical point, the man beneath her hands. "Starting compressions," she announced, her voice steady. She interlaced her fingers, placed her hands on his sternum, and began to push, hard and fast. The rhythm was brutal, relentless. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her arms started to burn, her shoulders screaming in protest, but she pushed through it, pouring every ounce of her strength, her will, into the simple, violent act of forcing a heart to remember its duty. From the corner of the bay, Henry watched, paralyzed. The world had dissolved into a tunnel of surreal horror. One moment, he was reassuring his father, who had been admitted for observation after a dizzy spell. The next, he was watching a stranger, a woman with a fierce, determined expression, rhythmically pushing on his father's chest, fighting to drag him back from the edge of oblivion. He felt useless, a helpless bystander to the most important battle of his life. He could buy companies, move markets, command the attention of world leaders, but in this small, sterile space, he was utterly powerless. All he could do was watch the unknown nurse and pray. Time stretched and warped. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like an eternity. The rest of the medical team swarmed the bay, a whirlwind of scrubs and equipment. But Lily remained the anchor, the engine at the center of the storm, her compressions never faltering. And then, a flicker on the monitor. A single beautiful, erratic beep. "We have a rhythm," someone shouted. A collective sigh of relief filled the bay. The team took over, the defibrillator was charged, and the organized chaos of a successful resuscitation continued. Lily finally slid off the gurney, her body trembling with adrenaline and exertion, and faded back, her job done. Later, when the storm had passed and his father, John Walton, was stable in the quiet, dimly lit ICU, Henry stood by his bedside, his hand clutching his father's. His heart ached with a gratitude so profound it was a physical pain. The curtain to the room swished open, and the nurse from the ER walked in. Lily. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her presence a calming balm in the sterile room. She checked the monitors, adjusted a drip, her movements sure and gentle. "I'm doing just fine, son," John said, his voice weak but clear. He smiled, a tired but genuine smile, and his gaze followed the nurse. "I'm being looked after by an angel." Lily's cheeks flushed a pretty shade of pink at the compliment, a small, shy smile touching her lips. "Just doing my job, Mr. Walton." Henry looked at her then, really looked at her. He wasn't seeing a nurse anymore. He wasn't seeing the anonymous woman who had fought for his father's life. He was seeing a person. A woman with kind eyes, a gentle smile, and a strength that had literally stared down death. The gratitude in his chest morphed into something else, something warmer and more complex, a sense of awe, of wonder, and a sudden intense curiosity that left him for the second time that night, completely breathless. The following day, the nurse's station was thrown into a state of cheerful chaos. A floral delivery had arrived, a bouquet so vast and vibrant it seemed to bring a swath of a wild meadow into the sterile hospital hallway. It was a riot of cheerful, unpretentious color, sunflowers with faces turned toward the light, bright white daisies, and sprigs of fragrant lavender. It was conspicuously devoid of the typical red roses or exotic lilies that usually signaled a grand, romantic gesture. This felt different, personal. A small, simple card was tucked into the foliage. Lily pulled it out, her fingers slightly clumsy. The handwriting was strong and clear. "Thank you for giving me more time with my father. Henry Walton." Lily stared at the card, a slow, warm feeling spreading through her chest. In her line of work, gratitude was often expressed in frantic, tearful whispers in the dead of night, or not at all. A gesture this thoughtful, this personal, was a rarity. Her colleagues teased her good-naturedly, but Lily found herself returning to the bouquet throughout her shift, touching a petal, inhaling the fresh, clean scent. It was a small island of beauty in a sea of antiseptic white. Later that evening, John Walton was discharged, his recovery progressing faster than anyone had expected. Lily felt a quiet sense of satisfaction as she signed off on his chart, the successful outcome a balm to her weary soul. She was at home, curled up on her worn-out sofa with a cup of tea and a book she was too tired to read, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but some instinct made her answer. "Hello? Lily? It's Henry Walton." His voice was even warmer and richer over the phone, a low, pleasant timbre that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Oh, Mr. Walton. Hello," she said, sitting up a little straighter. "I hope your father is settling in well at home." "He is, thank you. And he's already complaining about the food, so I know he's on the mend," he said, a hint of laughter in his voice. The sound was easy and genuine. "I'm calling to thank you again. The flowers didn't feel like enough." "They were beautiful," she said sincerely. "But you really don't have to thank me. I was just doing my job." It was her standard reply, the one she used to deflect praise and maintain a professional boundary. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I know you're going to say that," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. "But what you did, it wasn't just a job. You were the calm in the middle of a hurricane. You were extraordinary, and I would like to thank you properly." He took a breath. "Would you have dinner with me?" The question caught her completely off guard. Her world was one of 12-hour shifts, bodily fluids, and life or death decisions. It was not a world of dinner dates with the handsome, well-to-do sons of grateful patients. It felt inappropriate, complicated. "Oh, that's very kind of you, but it's not necessary, really," she began, already formulating a polite refusal. "I'm glad I could help, and that's thanks enough." "Please," he insisted, his voice soft but persistent, cutting through her practiced deflection. There was no trace of the entitled arrogance she might have expected from someone of his obvious means. There was only a sincere, compelling earnestness. "Just one dinner, so I can properly thank the woman who saved my father's life." His sincerity was disarming. It bypassed her professional defenses and touched something deeper. This wasn't a man trying to impress her. It was a son, filled with a profound and simple gratitude. Against her better judgment, against all the rules of hospital propriety she usually followed, a slow smile spread across her face. "Okay, Mr. Walton," she heard herself say, a note of amusement in her own voice. "Just one dinner." Preparing for the dinner felt strangely momentous. Lily stood before her small closet, a wave of insecurity washing over her. Her wardrobe consisted mostly of comfortable scrubs, worn-in jeans, and a handful of simple dresses reserved for rare social occasions. Nothing felt appropriate for a dinner with a man who sent meadows of sunflowers as a thank you note. She finally settled on a simple, dark blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, hoping it was elegant enough without trying too hard. She was expecting a taxi or a rideshare service, so when a sleek, dark gray Aston Martin, a car that looked more like a panther ready to pounce than a mode of transportation, pulled up in front of her modest apartment building, her jaw nearly hit the pavement. Henry stepped out from the driver's side. He wasn't in a stuffy suit as she might have imagined, but in tailored dark trousers and a crisp, open-collared white shirt under a soft gray blazer. The absence of a tie made him look relaxed, approachable, and even more devastatingly handsome than he had in the harsh lighting of the hospital. He smiled as he saw her, a warm, genuine smile that immediately put her at ease. "You look beautiful, Lily," he said, his voice a low murmur as he opened the passenger door for her. The compliment, so simply and sincerely delivered, made her blush. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Walton," she retorted, a playful note in her voice. "Henry," he corrected her gently. "Please." The drive was smooth, the car's interior a cocoon of soft leather and quiet power. He drove with an easy confidence, navigating the city streets while making effortless small talk, asking about her day, making her laugh with a story about his father's stubborn refusal to follow his doctor's dietary advice. He pulled up in front of Aria, a name Lily had only ever read about in glossy magazines. It was the city's most exclusive, most celebrated restaurant, a place where reservations were rumored to be booked a year in advance, a culinary temple for the city's elite. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of being out of her depth. A valet whisked the car away. As Henry led her toward the grand entrance, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, she braced herself for the noise, the crowd, the feeling of 100 pairs of eyes judging her simple dress. But as they stepped inside, she was met with a profound, unnerving silence. The dining room was a breathtaking expanse of soaring ceilings, soft, golden light, and tables draped in pristine white linen. But it was completely, utterly empty. There were no waiters bustling about, no clinking of glasses, no murmur of conversation. Just a single table, perfectly set for two, in the center of the vast, silent room. Lily stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with confusion. Where is everyone?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the cavernous space. Henry had the grace to look slightly abashed, a faint flush creeping up his neck. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Ah," he said. I closed the restaurant for us tonight." Lily stared at him, speechless. "I wanted us to be able to talk, to have some privacy without being interrupted or overheard," he explained, his earnestness overriding his embarrassment. "And I wasn't sure what you liked to eat, so I asked the chef to prepare a little bit of everything for a tasting menu. I hope that's okay." The sheer, mind-boggling extravagance of the gesture was overwhelming. It was so far beyond the realm of her reality that it bordered on the absurd. People didn't just close Aria, but the intention behind it, the sweet, almost naive desire to ensure her comfort and privacy, was so incredibly thoughtful, it made her heart ache. She stood there, caught between awe and a terrifying awareness of the chasm between their worlds. No one had ever done anything like this for her. No one had ever made her the singular focus of such a grand, impossible gesture. She didn't know whether to be completely enchanted or utterly terrified. Being the sole occupants of a world-renowned restaurant should have felt awkward, an intimidating performance under the focused gaze of the staff. Instead, it was magical. The head chef presented each course personally. The sommelier explained each wine pairing with quiet reverence, and the service was so discreet and seamless that it felt as if the food simply appeared. The meal itself was a symphony of flavors, the most exquisite food Lily had ever tasted. But it quickly became secondary. The true main course was the conversation. With the distractions of a crowded restaurant stripped away, there was only him. And he was captivating. He was funny, his humor dry and self-deprecating. He was brilliant, speaking about art and history with a quiet passion. But most of all, he was an incredible listener. He asked about her, not with the polite, superficial curiosity she was used to, but with a genuine, focused interest that made her feel like the most fascinating person in the world. He asked about nursing school, about the challenges and triumphs of her job. He didn't flinch when she described the gritty, often heartbreaking reality of the ER. Instead, he listened with a deep, empathetic respect. He asked about her dreams, and she found herself telling him about her vague, half-formed desire to one day work in pediatric oncology, a field that required a level of emotional resilience most people couldn't fathom. "It must take a special kind of strength to bring so much light to such a dark place," he said, his gaze full of an admiration that made her feel truly seen. When she, in turn, asked about his life, he was more reserved. He spoke lovingly of his father, of their shared passion for sailing. He mentioned the family business, describing it vaguely as a logistics and shipping enterprise his grandfather had started. He made it sound modest, almost quaint. He seemed far more interested in hearing about her life, her world, than in talking about his own. The hours melted away. By the end of the night, her cheeks ached from smiling, and she felt a comfortable, easy connection with him that she hadn't felt with anyone in a very long time. He drove her home, the comfortable silence in the car filled with the pleasant hum of a perfect evening. He walked her to the door of her apartment building, the gesture simple and gentlemanly. "I had a wonderful time, Lily," he said, his voice soft in the quiet of the night. "Me too, Henry," she replied, and she meant it more than she could say. He didn't try to kiss her. He simply held her gaze for a moment, a silent promise of something more, before giving her a small smile and walking back to his car. She watched him drive away, her heart fluttering with a hopeful, happy energy. Back in her apartment, buzzing from the night, she kicked off her shoes and curled up on the sofa. A nagging curiosity, a need to ground the magical evening in some sort of reality, took hold. She pulled out her laptop. She typed his name into the search bar, Henry Walton. She clicked enter. The results loaded, and she sat up straight, her heart beginning to pound. The screen was flooded with headlines from financial journals, society pages, and international news outlets. Heir to Walton Global Enterprises, Henry Walton, to speak at Davos. The state's most elusive billionaire. Who is Henry Walton? The Walton legacy, a shipping empire valued at over $432 billion. Photos of him appeared, not the relaxed, smiling man she had just had dinner with, but a more serious, formidable figure stepping out of private jets, shaking hands with world leaders, standing beside his father at the opening of the New York Stock Exchange. Lily felt the air leave her lungs. Her hands started to tremble. The man she had just shared a funny, intimate, and surprisingly normal dinner with wasn't just a grateful son. He wasn't just in logistics. He was the heir to one of the largest private fortunes on the planet. The grand, absurd gesture of closing the restaurant suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. For him, it wasn't a grand gesture. It was a Tuesday. She had just been on a date with a billionaire, a kind, humble, funny, secret billionaire, and he hadn't said a single word. Lily didn't sleep well. Her mind replayed the evening, superimposing the headlines and the staggering numbers over the memory of his easy smile and sincere eyes. The two versions of Henry Walton, the humble, grateful son and the multi-billionaire heir, were impossible to reconcile. She felt a confusing mixture of awe, intimidation, and a surprising pang of disappointment. The simple, genuine connection she had felt seemed tainted now, complicated by a reality she couldn't comprehend. Her phone rang late the next morning, while she was trying to distract herself with laundry. His name flashed on the screen, and her heart did a nervous little jump. She took a deep breath and answered, determined to be direct. Hello? Hi, Lily. It's Henry. His voice was as warm and pleasant as she remembered, but today it carried a different weight. I had a really wonderful time last night. A hopeful note underscored his words. I was hoping I could see you again. Here it was. The moment of truth. I had a great time too, Henry, she began, her voice even. But there's something we need to talk about first. She paused, gathering her courage. I Googled you. A heavy silence stretched over the line. For a moment she thought he might have hung up. Then she heard him let out a long, weary sigh. It wasn't a sigh of annoyance, but of resignation. I figured you would, he said, his voice losing some of its bright energy. And I'm sorry, Lily. I truly am. I wasn't trying to deceive you. He sounded so genuinely regretful that her defensiveness began to soften. It's just, he continued, struggling to find the words, I hate that part of my life. I hate the billionaire label. I hate how people change the second they find out. Their eyes get a different look. They start seeing dollar signs and opportunities instead of a person. I've lost count of the number of people who have tried to use me, or my father, through me. His voice was quiet, laced with a profound loneliness that she had never considered. For one night, I just wanted to be Henry, the guy whose dad you saved. I wanted to see if you would like that guy. Is that selfish? His raw honesty disarmed her completely. He wasn't hiding his wealth out of arrogance, but out of a deep-seated need for genuine connection. He was protecting himself. She, who had built her own professional and emotional walls, could understand that better than most. The intimidation she felt began to melt away, replaced by a surprising wave of empathy. No, she said softly. It's not selfish. I get it. She took a breath. Okay, Henry. I'll see you again. Really? The relief in his voice was palpable. Yes, but on one condition, she said, a playful, challenging note entering her voice. Anything. No more closed restaurants. No more grand billionaire gestures. Next time we go somewhere I can actually afford to buy my own dessert. She heard him laugh on the other end of the line, a full, genuine, relieved sound that made her smile. You have a deal, Lily Turner, he said. It's a deal. For their second date, Lily was determined to level the playing field. She chose the Little Owl, a tiny, bustling Italian restaurant tucked away on a cobblestone street in her neighborhood. It was the complete antithesis of Aria. The tables were packed close together. The air was thick with the scent of garlic and simmering tomatoes, and the sound of boisterous conversation and clattering plates was a constant, lively hum. It was her favorite spot, a place of warmth, authenticity, and incredible lasagna. When she told him where they were going, he didn't hesitate. Sounds perfect, he'd said. She watched him as he navigated the crowded space, expecting to see a flicker of discomfort, a sign that he was out of his element. But there was none. He shed his billionaire persona at the door like a heavy coat. He smiled warmly at the hostess. He didn't flinch when a waiter bumped into his chair, and he looked around the noisy, chaotic room not with disdain, but with a genuine, curious interest. This place is great, he said, leaning forward so she could hear him over the din. It feels alive. To her surprise, he fit in seamlessly. He wasn't playing a part. He was genuinely enjoying himself. He charmed their waitress, a gruff, no-nonsense woman named Maria, making her crack a rare smile. He insisted they share a bottle of the house red wine, pronouncing it excellent with a sincerity that made the restaurant's owner, who overheard, beam with pride. He was just Henry, a man enjoying a good meal with a woman he was interested in. The illusion was so perfect, so complete, that when it shattered, the effect was jarring. Lily, hey, a familiar voice cut through the noise. It was Mark, one of the senior residents from the hospital, a good-natured but notoriously gossipy doctor. He was at a nearby table with his wife. Mark, hi, Lily said, a little flustered by the interruption. Mark's eyes slid from Lily to the man sitting across from her. "Didn't know you'd be in this part of town. And who's your friend?" he asked, his tone friendly and casual. "Mark, this is Henry. Henry, this is my colleague, Dr. Mark Chen," she said, making the introductions. "Henry." "Walton?" Mark asked, his eyes widening slightly as he made the connection. The name, combined with the face he'd likely seen in news reports, clicked into place. The change was instantaneous and deeply uncomfortable. Mark's relaxed posture straightened. His casual smile became more deferential, more strained. "Mr. Walton, it's an honor, sir," he gushed, his tone shifting from that of a peer to that of an inferior. "I've read all about your family's philanthropic work with the city's hospitals. It's truly remarkable." Henry's smile became a little tighter, a little more polite. "Thank you, Doctor. My father believes in giving back to the community." The conversation was brief, but the damage was done. After Mark returned to his table, occasionally stealing awestruck glances in their direction, a heavy silence fell over them. Henry sighed, a deep, weary sound, and stared down at his wineglass. "See?" he said quietly, not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. "That's what I was talking about." He looked up at her, and his face was stripped of the easy charm from moments before. In its place was the tired, lonely expression of a man who constantly had to question if people were seeing him, or the name and the fortune that followed him like a shadow. For the first time, Lily truly understood. It wasn't just about avoiding gold diggers. It was a fundamental, exhausting loneliness, a constant battle to be seen for who he was. And in that moment, her heart went out to him, a wave of empathy so strong it felt like it could bridge the vast, impossible distance between their two worlds. A week later, it was Henry's turn. "There's a charity gala my family's foundation is sponsoring," he'd explained over the phone, his voice hesitant. "It's for the children's hospital. I have to go. I was wondering if you would come with me." He rushed to add, "No pressure at all, just as my date. It would just be nice to have you there." And so, Lily found herself stepping into a world she had only ever imagined. The gala was held in a grand museum, its marble halls transformed into a glittering forest of ice sculptures and cascading floral arrangements. The air hummed with the quiet clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of conversations about stock portfolios and summering in the Hamptons. It was a sea of designer gowns, jaw-dropping jewelry, and practiced predatory smiles. Lily felt like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into an aviary of exotic peacocks. Her dress, a simple but elegant navy blue gown she'd bought from a high-end department store after much agonizing, had felt beautiful in the shop. Here, it felt painfully plain. She clutched her small handbag like a shield, acutely aware of the subtle, appraising glances being sent her way. Henry, however, was her anchor. He seemed to sense her unease, his hand a constant reassuring presence on the small of her back. He navigated the room with a quiet authority, his posture relaxed but commanding. He was in his element, yet he made her feel like she was the only person in the room, leaning in to whisper a witty observation about a particularly ostentatious guest or steering her toward a quiet corner when he sensed she was feeling overwhelmed. The inevitable confrontation came near the silent auction tables. A woman with a surgically tightened face and diamonds dripping from her ears glided toward them. Her eyes raked over Lily's simple dress with a look of barely concealed disdain. "Henry, darling," the woman purred, ignoring Lily completely. "I almost didn't recognize you without a Beaumont on your arm." She then turned her critical gaze fully on Lily. "And who is this quaint little thing you've brought?" "This is Lily Turner," Henry said, his voice dangerously smooth, his arm tightening protectively around Lily's waist. The woman's eyes did another slow, insulting sweep of Lily's dress. "Turner," she mused. "I don't believe I know that name. And that dress, I simply must know the designer. It's so brave, to be so understated, The insult was wrapped in a veneer of false curiosity, making it all the more venomous. Lily felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. She was about to stammer something, anything, when Henry spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it cut through the air like a shard of ice. "Lily's dress isn't from a famous designer, it's true," he said, looking directly at the woman, his eyes cold. "She's a nurse. She prefers to spend her time and energy saving people's lives, not worrying about price tags and brand names." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It's one of the many, many things I admire about her." The socialite's perfectly painted smile froze on her face. She was left speechless, utterly defeated by a logic her superficial world couldn't comprehend. Without another word, Henry took Lily's hand. "Excuse us," he said, not to the woman, but to the air around her. He led Lily away from the crowd, through a set of glass doors, and out onto a quiet, moonlit terrace overlooking the city. The cool night air felt wonderful on her hot cheeks. Her heart was hammering in her chest, a chaotic mix of lingering humiliation and a soaring, fierce gratitude. "I'm sorry," Henry said, his voice tight with anger. "I shouldn't have brought you here." "I'm so sorry she said that to you." "Don't be sorry," Lily whispered, turning to face him. The city lights glittered behind him, creating a halo around his silhouette. "Thank you." In that moment, under the vast, starry sky, the chasm between their worlds seemed to vanish. There was no billionaire, no nurse. There was just a man who had defended her with a fierce, intelligent loyalty, and a woman who was realizing, with a terrifying, thrilling certainty, that she was falling for him. The terrace was a quiet sanctuary, a world away from the glittering chaos inside. The distant sounds of the orchestra and the city's gentle hum were a soft, muted backdrop to the charged silence that had fallen between them. Lily's heart was still beating a rapid, unsteady rhythm, not from the socialite's insult, but from Henry's defense. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the soft glow of the moonlight. The anger had faded from his face, replaced by a look of sincere, anxious concern for her. "Did you really mean it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What you said in there, about admiring me?" He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second against her skin. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. "I meant every word, Lily," he said, his voice low and serious, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "In my world, everything is a transaction. People are valued for their name, their connections, their net worth. It's exhausting. It's hollow." He looked into her eyes, and she saw a raw vulnerability there that he showed to no one else. "And then there's you. You're real. You're compassionate and strong, and you dedicate your life to helping people without asking for anything in return. You're the most impressive, most genuine person I have met in years." He took a shaky breath, the confession he was about to make clear on his face. "I asked you to dinner to thank you for saving my father," he whispered, his voice growing thick with an emotion he could no longer contain. "That was the truth. But it's not the whole truth." He moved closer still, his other hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "The whole truth, Lily, is that I keep asking you out, because I can't stop thinking about you. From the moment I saw you in that ER, so calm and so fierce, you took my breath away, and you haven't given it back since." The world seemed to stop. There was no gala, no city, no chasm between their lives. There was only the look in his eyes, the warmth of his hand on her skin, and the undeniable truth of his words. He lowered his head, his gaze dropping to her lips, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. He kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of explosive, demanding passion. It was tender, questioning, and filled with all the pent-up wonder and admiration he had just confessed. It was a kiss that tasted of champagne and cool night air, and the breathtaking relief of a truth finally spoken. It was the gentle, inevitable collision of two worlds, two hearts, that were no longer separate. It was no longer about gratitude. It was no longer about different worlds. In the quiet magic of that first kiss, it was simply about a man and a woman who were undeniably and irrevocably falling in love. The magical bubble of the terrace, the perfect, private moment of their first kiss, burst before the sun even rose. Lily woke to the insistent buzzing of her phone on the nightstand. It wasn't her alarm. It was a cascade of text messages, one after another, from her friends and colleagues. "OMG, Lily, is this you? You're on the cover of the Daily Goss." With a sense of dread, she unlocked her phone. The first thing she saw was a photo. It was grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a long lens camera, but it was unmistakable. It was her and Henry on the terrace, locked in their first kiss. The city lights glittered romantically behind them, creating a perfect storybook image. The headline above it was anything but romantic. "The Recluse and the Nurse, Billionaire heir Henry Walton's mystery woman revealed." Her heart sank. She clicked on the article. It was a breathless piece of speculative gossip, piecing together the few facts they had: her name, her profession, the fact that she had been the nurse on duty when his father was admitted to the hospital. They painted a narrative of a whirlwind, unlikely romance, a real-life Cinderella story. And suddenly, her quiet, anonymous life was over. The hospital, once her sanctuary, became a gauntlet. Colleagues stopped her in the hallway, their questions a mixture of genuine curiosity and thinly veiled envy. Patients' families looked at her differently, with a new, uncomfortable awe. She felt like an exhibit in a zoo, her life no longer her own. The worst part was the paparazzi. A handful of them were camped out across the street from the hospital entrance, their long lenses pointed like sniper rifles. They followed her when she left her shift, shouting questions, their camera flashes like small, aggressive explosions. "Lily, is it true you're dating Henry Walton? How does it feel to be dating a billionaire? Is it love, or are you after his money?" She hated it. She hated the intrusion, the assumptions, the way her life, her character, her very real feelings for Henry were being twisted into a cheap, sensationalized story for public consumption. Henry was furious. When he called her, his voice was tight with a cold, protective rage. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I have my legal team drafting a cease and desist. We'll issue a statement demanding privacy. We'll sue them for harassment." His instinct was to fight, to use his immense power and resources to crush the problem. But Lily, whose life had been about de-escalating chaotic situations, knew that would be like pouring gasoline on a fire. "No, Henry," she said, her voice calm and steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. "Don't. Please." "What? Why not? They're harassing you." "Because that will only make it a bigger story," she explained patiently. "A statement, a lawsuit, that confirms there's something to talk about. It feeds the beast. The best way to kill a story like this is to starve it of oxygen. We just ignore it. We live our lives. Eventually they'll get bored and move on to someone else." There was a silence on the other end of the line. He was a man used to taking decisive, powerful action. The idea of doing nothing was completely foreign to him, but he heard the quiet strength and wisdom in her voice. "Okay, Lily," he said finally, a note of awe in his voice. "Okay, we'll do it your way." He agreed, but she could hear the worry still lingering in his tone. He was terrified. Not of the press, not of the gossip, but of the very real possibility that his world, with all its ugly, intrusive baggage, was about to swallow hers whole. And he feared it might be the one thing he was powerless to stop. The media storm, though unnerving, eventually began to subside, just as Lily had predicted. Their strategy of quiet dignity worked. They continued to see each other, opting for quiet nights in their respective apartments rather than public outings, their bond deepening in the shared sanctuary they created away from prying eyes. A few weeks later, Henry invited her for a Sunday dinner at the Walton estate. The atmosphere was completely different from her first, tense visit. John Walton, now fully recovered, and his old, vibrant self, treated Lily not as a guest, but as a cherished member of the family. He seated her next to him at the grand dining table, regaling her with embarrassing stories of Henry's childhood. "I'm telling you, Lily," John said, his eyes twinkling as he raised his wine glass. "This boy was a sullen cloud of gloom before you came along." "To Lily," he toasted, his voice thick with genuine affection, "for bringing the sunshine back into my son's life." Henry blushed, a rare and endearing sight, as he smiled at Lily across the table. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and acceptance, Lily felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of belonging she had rarely known. The idyllic scene shattered in an instant. In the middle of a laugh, John's expression changed. His hand flew to his chest, his face contorting in pain. A strangled gasp escaped his lips, and before anyone could react, he slumped forward in his chair, unconscious. The world dissolved into chaos. Henry's mother screamed. Henry froze, the color draining from his face, the horror of the ER repeating itself. But Lily didn't freeze. Her training took over, a calm, clear voice cutting through her own panic. "Henry, call 911 now," she commanded, already moving, gently lowering John to the floor. "He has a pulse, but it's thready. We need to keep him stable." She worked with a focused, professional calm, monitoring his breathing, loosening his collar, being the anchor in the storm until the paramedics arrived. At the hospital, the news was a mixture of relief and dread. John had suffered a second, milder heart attack. He was stable, but the doctors wanted to keep him for several days of observation and testing. Henry was shaken to his core, the terrifying fragility of his father's life once again laid bare. Lily stayed with him, her hand a constant, steady presence in his, her quiet strength his only solace. The next day, while Henry was at the hospital with his father, Lily's phone rang. It was her best friend Sarah, and her voice was a frantic, panicked whisper. "Lily? Oh God, I'm so glad you answered. I'm freaking out," Sarah cried. "My period is late. Like really late. I think I might be pregnant. I'm too scared to even buy a test. I'm too scared to find out by myself. Can you please come with me?" Lily's heart went out to her friend. "Of course," she said immediately, her own exhaustion and stress forgotten in the face of her friend's panic. "I'm on my way. We'll figure this out together." They met at a large anonymous chain pharmacy downtown. Sarah was pale and trembling, so Lily took charge. "Stay here, I'll get it," she said reassuringly. She walked down the aisle, her mind a million miles away, thinking about John Walton, about Henry, about her friend's terror. She grabbed a pregnancy test from the shelf, a simple box, and walked to the front of the store. To calm her friend's nerves, she even offered a small, reassuring smile as she paid the cashier. She didn't notice the beat-up sedan parked across the street. She didn't see the glint of a long-range camera lens. She didn't know that a freelance paparazzi, a bottom feeder who had been fruitlessly tailing her for weeks, had just hit the jackpot. The photo was perfect, clear, undeniable, and utterly damning. Lily Turner, the billionaire's new girlfriend, standing at a pharmacy counter, buying a pregnancy test. The explosion came the next morning. Lily woke up to her phone vibrating itself off the nightstand, a relentless, furious buzzing that signaled something was terribly wrong. With a sense of deep foreboding, she reached for it. The screen was a nightmare. Dozens of notifications, all linking to the same story, from every corner of the internet's gossip machine. The headline, splashed across the top of a sleazy tabloid's website, was a masterpiece of malicious insinuation. "Gold digger's gambit? Henry Walton's nurse girlfriend buys pregnancy test as billionaire father fights for his life." Below it was the photo. Her at the pharmacy counter, the box clearly visible in her hand, a small, innocent smile on her face that the article twisted into a look of cunning triumph. Her blood ran cold. She felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to sit on the edge of her bed. The article was a work of pure poison. It painted her as a conniving, opportunistic predator, a gold digger who had deliberately chosen a moment of family tragedy to trap her billionaire boyfriend. They twisted her profession, her act of saving John's life, into the first step of a calculated seduction. They took a simple act of friendship, helping Sarah, and warped it into a sinister plot. The world, which had briefly felt full of hope and warmth, turned ugly and hostile in an instant. She had to see Henry. She had to see John. She threw on clothes, her hands shaking so badly she could barely button her jeans, and drove to the hospital, a place that had always been her sanctuary, but now felt like the scene of a crime. The moment she stepped out of her car in the hospital parking garage, they descended. It was like a scene from a horror movie. A swarm of paparazzi, far more aggressive than before, materialized from behind cars and pillars, surrounding her, shoving cameras and microphones in her face. "Miss Turner, is it true you're pregnant? Are you trying to trap Henry Walton with a baby? How could you do this while his father is sick? Do you have any shame?" The questions were like physical blows. The flashing lights were blinding, disorienting. She felt trapped, suffocated, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She put her hands up, trying to shield her face, trying to push through the wall of bodies. Suddenly, a furious roar cut through the chaos. "Get away from her!" It was Henry. He burst through the pack of photographers like a force of nature, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. He didn't touch anyone, but his presence, his fury, was so palpable that the aggressive pack actually stumbled back. He wrapped a protective arm around Lily, pulling her tight against his side, and forged a path through the stunned crowd, his body a shield between her and the cameras. He practically bundled her into his car, slamming the door shut on the cacophony. Inside the silent, leather-lined interior, the adrenaline drained away, leaving only a hollow, trembling shock. The vicious words, the blinding flashes, the feeling of being hunted. It all crashed down on her. "I can't do this, Henry," she whispered, the words fractured by sobs she could no longer control. Tears streamed down her face, hot and bitter. "I'm not strong enough for this world." She looked at him, her eyes full of a despair that shattered his heart. "They turned me into a monster." The penthouse, once a symbol of a world she found intimidating, now felt like the only safe harbor in a raging storm. Henry led her inside, his arm never leaving her shoulders, his touch a steady, grounding presence. He sat her down on the plush sofa, knelt before her, and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "I'll fix this, Lily," he said, his voice a low, fierce promise. "I will destroy them. I'll have my lawyers bankrupt every single one of those tabloids. I'll make sure the photographer who took that picture never works again. I will burn their world to the ground for what they did to you." His protective fury was a powerful, comforting balm. But as she looked into his angry, determined eyes, she knew it wasn't the answer. His world fighting back against itself would only create a bigger war, and she would be forever trapped in the middle. She took a deep, shuddering breath, finding a sliver of the calm she reserved for her most critical patients. "No, Henry," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She placed her hand over his. "You can't." He stared at her, confused. "Why not? They can't get away with this." "This isn't about them," she explained, her heart aching with the truth she was about to speak. "This is about me. I became a nurse to help people, to be a quiet, steady presence in the middle of their chaos. My purpose is to heal, to soothe." She looked around the magnificent apartment, at the glittering city beyond the glass. "And now, because of my connection to you, I am the chaos. I'm the source of pain and stress for you, for your family. I'm a headline, a scandal. I look in the mirror, and I don't recognize the person I've become in this world. The words hurt to say, but they were true. The joy, the love, the incredible connection she felt with him was being poisoned by the toxic ecosystem that surrounded his life. I need a break, she said, the words feeling like shards of glass in her throat. I need to step away from all of this, from the cameras, the gossip, from your world. I need to find myself again. Is this you breaking up with me? He asked, his voice hollow, a look of raw panic in his eyes. No, she whispered, tears welling up again. I love you, Henry. I think that's the only thing I'm sure of right now. This isn't about you or us. It's about me. I'm losing myself, and if I let that happen, I'll have nothing left to give you anyway. He saw the profound, unshakable pain in her eyes. He saw that this wasn't a negotiation or a plea for reassurance. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, and to deny her that would be the cruelest act of all. Devastated, but loving her enough to respect her need, he nodded slowly. Okay, Lily, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. I understand. He squeezed her hand. I'll wait. However long it takes, I'll be right here. She went back to her small, quiet apartment that night. The silence she had once cherished now felt cavernous, deafening. It was no longer a peaceful retreat, but a hollow reminder of what she had lost. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of hollow days and long, sleepless nights for both of them. For Lily, every quiet moment was filled with the memory of his laugh, his touch. For Henry, the sprawling penthouse felt like a tomb. The privacy and order he had once valued above all else were now just loneliness and emptiness. He realized, with a clarity that was both painful and absolute, that a quiet life meant nothing without her to share it with. One night, staring out at the city lights that now seemed cold and distant, he couldn't stand it anymore. He couldn't wait. He couldn't let the poison of his world win. He grabbed his car keys, his heart pounding with a new, fierce resolve. He wasn't going to let her fight this battle alone. He wasn't going to let her retreat. He was going to fight for her, for them, no matter what the press or his family or the entire world had to say about it. The sharp, insistent buzz of her apartment's intercom cut through the heavy silence of the evening. Lily's heart leaped into her throat. No one ever buzzed her apartment unannounced. With trembling hands, she pressed the talk button. Hello? It's me. Henry's voice, low and slightly distorted through the small speaker, was all it took. A wave of longing so intense it made her dizzy washed over her. Let me come up, Lily, he said. It wasn't a demand, but a plea. Please. She buzzed him in, her mind racing. When she opened her door, he was standing there, looking tired and drawn, but with a fire of determination in his eyes she had never seen before. I know you asked for space, he said immediately, before she could speak. And I tried. I really did. But it's impossible. He took a step closer, his presence filling her small hallway. Living without you isn't living, Lily. It's just waiting. And I'm done waiting. She thought he was going to plead his case, to promise again to fix everything. Instead, he made an offer that was completely unexpected. Run away with me, he said, his voice urgent. Just for the weekend. No phones, no news, no city. Let me take you to a place where no one knows my last name. A place where I was just Henry. The proposition was crazy. It solved nothing. But the look in his eyes, a desperate need to connect with her away from the wreckage of their two worlds, was irresistible. Intrigued, and with her heart pounding with a hope she thought she had extinguished, she found herself nodding. Hours later, they were driving north, the city's oppressive glow shrinking in the rearview mirror. They drove until the highways turned into country roads, and the streetlights were replaced by the vast, star-dusted canopy of the night sky. He finally turned down a long, unpaved driveway, the car's headlights cutting through a thick forest of pine, and pulled up to a small, rustic cabin nestled on the shore of a moonlit lake. "My grandparents built this place," he explained, his voice softer, more relaxed than she had heard it in weeks. "It was our family's refuge before everything got so big." The cabin was the antithesis of his penthouse. It was simple, cozy, and filled with the scent of wood smoke and old books. The furniture was worn and comfortable, the walls adorned with faded photographs of a happy, normal-looking family. This was a home, not a showpiece. They spent the next day in a different world. They walked for hours through the silent, sun-dappled woods. He taught her how to skip stones across the glassy surface of the lake. They cooked a simple meal of grilled fish, which he'd caught himself, in the cabin's small, old-fashioned kitchen. Here, he wasn't the formidable billionaire. He was relaxed, happy, his laughter easy and frequent. He was just Henry. That night, they sat on a braided rug in front of the crackling fireplace, the warmth chasing away the evening chill. "I brought you here for a reason, Lily," he said, his voice low and thick with emotion as he stared into the flames. "This is the only place on earth where I've ever felt completely myself, where I wasn't the Walton heir or the future CEO. I was just a kid who loved to fish and climb trees." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the fire's golden light, his vulnerability a raw, open wound. "I wanted you to meet that person," he whispered, "the real me, the man who exists away from all the noise." His confession disarmed her completely. He hadn't brought her here to impress her with some hidden luxury retreat. He had brought her here to share his soul. He had stripped away the billions, the power, the entire world that had come between them, to show her the man at the very center of it all. "Henry," she whispered back, her own voice choked with emotion as she reached out to touch his cheek. "That's the man I fell in love with." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a moment. He moved closer, the space between them disappearing, the warmth of the fire no match for the heat that flared between them. She knew, with a deep and certain clarity, that this weekend wasn't just an escape. It was a crossroads, and they had just chosen their path, together. The next morning they woke with the sun. They sat together on the small, weathered wooden pier, mugs of hot coffee warming their hands, and watched as the day was born. A low-lying mist hovered over the still, glassy surface of the lake, creating a magical, ethereal world that felt entirely their own. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the pilings and the distant call of a loon. "I don't want this weekend to end," Henry said, his voice a quiet murmur that seemed to blend with the morning's profound peace. He looked at her, his expression open and serious. "I don't want us to end." He set his mug down on the pier and turned to face her fully, taking her free hand in his. His palm was warm, his grip steady. "I know my world is complicated," he began, his gaze unwavering. "I know it's loud and intrusive and scary, and I know I dragged you into a storm you never asked for. I spent so long trying to protect my privacy, to keep that world at bay, and all I ended up with was a quiet, empty life." He squeezed her hand, his voice growing thick with emotion. "And then you came along, and you're the calm, Lily. You're my calm in the middle of all of it. The chaos doesn't matter when I'm with you." He took a deep breath, his heart in his eyes. "I don't want to be the reclusive billionaire anymore. I don't want to be the Walton heir. I just want to be the man who gets to love you, the man who gets to build a life with you, whether it's in a penthouse in the city or a cabin in the woods." His words, his sincerity, the sheer, unvarnished truth of his love brought tears to her eyes. "Lily Turner," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, full of a hope that was both terrifying and beautiful. "Will you marry me?" He opened his other hand. Resting in his palm was not a box. It was a ring, but not the kind she would have ever expected. It wasn't a massive, blinding diamond designed to signal wealth. It was a vintage, intricate band of what looked like woven gold, holding a single deep green emerald that seemed to capture the color of the pine forest surrounding them. It was unique, personal, and breathtakingly beautiful. "It was my grandmother's," he explained softly. "She gave it to my father and told him to give it to me. For when I found the one person who saw the man, not the name. I think she would have loved you." With tears streaming down her cheeks, blurring the image of the rising sun into a golden haze, Lily looked from the exquisite, meaningful ring to the face of the man she loved more than life itself. She didn't need to think. Her heart had known the answer for a long time. She extended her hand, her fingers trembling, and let him slide the ring into place. "Yes," she whispered. The word carried on a happy, tearful breath. "Yes, Henry. I'll marry you." He slid the emerald ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. He framed her face with his hands and kissed her, a deep, soulful kiss that tasted of coffee and morning mist and the promise of 1,000 sunrises to come. As they kissed, the sun finally broke free of the horizon, burning away the last of the fog and bathing them in a warm, golden light, sealing their promise. A year later, the sterile, intimidating halls of the city's main hospital were filled with laughter, bright colors, and the sound of hope. It was the grand opening of the new Walton Turner Pediatric Wing. The name, etched onto a gleaming plaque at the entrance, was a testament to their partnership, a fusion of his resources and her heart. Lily stood beside Henry, not as a guest or a +1, but as a driving force behind the project. She had left the frantic, reactive world of the ER and, with Henry's full support, had helped create and now led the hospital's new patient and family wellness program. Her new role was to be the calm, the advocate, the source of comfort for families navigating the terrifying chaos of a child's illness. She was doing the work she was born to do, on a scale she had never imagined. John Walton, looking healthier and happier than ever, beamed with pride as he cut the ceremonial ribbon. He pulled Lily into a fierce hug. "I told you she was an angel, son," he said to Henry over her shoulder. Later, Henry found her in a quiet corner, watching a small child giggle as a therapy dog performed a trick. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Every day," he murmured into her ear, his voice full of a quiet, profound awe. "Every single day, I find a new reason to be proud of you." She leaned back against him, her heart full. The press was there, but the reporters were different now. They wrote about her work, her innovative programs, her impact. They called her a philanthropist, a patient advocate. The gold digger narrative had been completely eclipsed by the undeniable truth of her character. She had not been defeated by his world. She had reshaped a part of it for the better. That night, they weren't at a gala or in the penthouse. They were back at the cabin by the lake, a place that had become their true home. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, dancing glow over the room. "You know," Lily said, her head resting on his chest as they lay on the familiar braided rug. "All of this, it started with a heart that stopped beating." Henry smiled, tilting her chin up to look at her. He kissed her softly, a slow, tender kiss, full of a love that was now as easy and natural as breathing. "No," he corrected her gently, his eyes full of a love that was deep and endless. "It started with a heart that began to beat faster. Mine. From the very first moment I saw you,